George Bilgere started his academic career as a pre-med major, but chemistry did him in, and so he did what any sensible human would do. He became an English major. Actually, the truth about the end of his pre-medical career, as he shared with Garrison Keillor, was the inspiration for his first poem, a scientific line about a college janitor that donated his body to become the school's cadaver. In reality, the janitor's name was Morris, and when pre-med Bilgere walked into the cadaver lab to see poor Morris partially dissected on a gurney instead of mopping the floors, Bilgere decided that medicine probably wasn't the path for him. So instead, he wrote a poem, and lucky for us, began his illustrious poetic career. Having been described as the cheeky nephew of Billy Collins and the brash, blunt brother of Tony Hoagland, Bilgere unapologetically believes that poetry should be the common language of the culture. As such, his poems paint a picture of middle-class, middle-aged, middle America that is not just easy to read, but defiantly easy to read, as it winds through suburban memory in a matter-of-fact way that manages to be freshly hilarious while still pinching at our tender American egos and heartstrings. The poems in his collection, Imperial, just to hint at a few of my favorites, range in subjects from garden hoses to Odysseus and everything in between. Lobsters, laundry lint, a busboy, a gorgeous, highly coveted imperial yo-yo. The author of 6 poetry collections, Bilgere has received numerous awards and grants in recognition of his invigorating contributions to American poetry, including a Pushcart Prize and the May Swenson Award, the Witter-Binner Foundation Grant, and the National Endowment for the Arts, among others. Bilgere's third book, The Good Kiss, was selected by Billy Collins to win the University of Akron Poetry Award, and his work has appeared in a number of anthologies and journals, including Poetry, Plowshares, The Kenyon Review, and the Best American Poetry Series. Bilgere has a voice like purring butter that will make you want to call your dad or wander the streets of your own suburban neighborhood. So, without further ado, I suggest you strap in and wake up, because this is going to be fun. With pleasure, please welcome George Bilgere.
I wish I could have gone on for at least 30 minutes more. I mean, why stop there? And I want to say something about my sort of thwarted medical career. Yeah, it's true it didn't work out, thanks to the diabolical nature of chemistry. But what I kind of feel bad about, giving up being a doctor, no one has ever thanked me for all the lives I saved by not becoming a doctor. I feel I should get some credit for that, but no. It's really great to be here, and I'd like to thank Professor Susan Howe for having me. Many of you may not know this. Dr. Howe and I were grad students together many, many, many moons ago at the University of Denver, and we just had so much fun, and she's always been one of my favorite people, one of the most intelligent and compassionate people I know, and one of the finest poets. You are so fortunate to have her with you. I can't believe she's leaving. Is there some way of stopping this? There's got to be. I wanted to mention something. That very kind introduction mentioned this new book of mine called Imperial. And the book just came out last year, and when the book appeared, one of my students said, "Wow, another book, your 6th book. Are you going to be retiring?" And some of you aren't laughing. You should, because if you knew how much money you make from a book of poetry, it's kind of comical. But so after I stopped sobbing, I said, you don't really make much money selling books of poetry, but you can make a nice career talking about poetry and giving readings. But later that year, later in the year, something happened to me that became my first opportunity to make some serious money in poetry. I was contacted by the good people at Hallmark Cards. And one of their employees had seen one of my poems and said, contacted me to say that they thought maybe I was Hallmark material. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, but they said, would you like to write a kind of test poem for us? And, we'll show it to our editorial staff at Hallmark and decide whether we might, invite you onto the Hallmark writing team. And so I thought, what the heck, let's give it a try. And I don't often have a stroke of genius, but in this case, I had this incredible flash of inspiration. We live in an age of medical miracles where we're always having, as soon as something wears out in our bodies, we have it transplanted, right? Hearts, kidneys, lungs, buttocks, breasts, you name it. If it goes wrong, they'll just plug something in for you, right? And it really is a wonderful thing. And I thought what I would do is design a range of cards, one for each organ that could be transplanted into you. And when you have a friend who has, say a kidney transplant, you just go down to the CVS, to the card section, and look under K, and there's a card for their kidney transplant. So I wrote the poem and I sent it in to them. And about a week later, I got a response that I guess I would describe the tone as frosty. And they said, thank you, we've read your poem with great interest, but regret to say it does not meet our current needs. And that was it. I was rejected, it was over. So that was kind of tough, but you want to hear the poem that I wrote for them? Yeah. Okay, here it is. Thinking of you at this special time and hoping your organ replacement went fine. Come on. That's a good poem. Before I begin with my own stuff, poetry readings can be sort of egotistical affairs. It's all about the poet, and you get to talk about your work and yourself. But I think it's kind of nice to acknowledge the poets whose example made your own work and your own career possible, and maybe to read a work from someone else rather than just sort of focusing on yourself. So I would like to begin my reading by reciting a poem by a poet who was really crucial to me in the beginning of my career, T.S. Eliot. And here's the poem. See if I can remember this. The Wasteland. Okay, maybe we're not going to have time for that one. How many of you have read The Wasteland? Would that be funny if that's how I started my reading? Okay, I'm not going to do The Wasteland. I just don't think we have time for that. I'm going to do a poem by a guy named David Budbill. I love this poem because it's so true of the ego of all artists, okay? Here's the poem. It's called Famous. I want to be famous so I can be humble about being famous. What good is this humility when I'm mired in this obscurity? It's kind of nice, right? You really have to be famous in order to be humble about being famous. So, something really weird has happened in the world in the last few years, and it's just getting more and more and more overwhelming. What I'm talking about, of course, is the phenomenon of the cell phone and of the of digital media, the iPad, the iPod, the MacBook, the laptop, the cell phone. We're fast approaching a time when everyone is on the screen all the time. And my idea of a civilized life is getting up in the morning and walking down to your favorite cafe and buying the newspaper and getting a cup of coffee in your own little community and reading the paper and talking to the people around you in your community, right? Getting to kind of know the people that constitute your neighborhood. And that pleasure of mine has really almost vanished over the past few years because now when I go to my favorite cafe, everyone's on the phone or they're tapping away at their screen. And I guess they're having conversations like this. Things are fine here in my cafe. How are things in your cafe? Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, you could actually talk to the people in your cafe. So I wrote a poem about this, and it's called Bridal Shower. Perhaps in a distant cafe, 4 or 5 people are talking with the 4 or 5 people who are chatting on their cell phones this morning, here in my favorite cafe. And perhaps someone there, someone like me, is watching them as they frown or smile or shrug to their invisible friends or lovers, jabbing the air for emphasis. And like me, he misses the old days when talking to yourself meant you were crazy. Back when being crazy was a big deal, not just an acronym or something you could take a pill for. I liked it when people who were talking to themselves might actually have been talking to God or an angel. You respected people like that. You didn't want to kill them, as I want to kill the woman at the next table, with the little blue light on her ear, who has been telling the emptiness in front of her about her daughter's bridal shower in astonishing detail for the past 30 minutes. Oh, person like me, phoneless in your distant cafe, I wish we could meet to discuss this, and perhaps you would help me murder this woman on her cell phone. After which we could have a cup of coffee, maybe a bagel, and talk to each other face to face. That's my feeling. Okay, so I'm from Cleveland, and as any of you have been following the weather news know, we really got socked. It was a horrible winter for us. Tremendous amount of snow, and the same was true last year, the year before last. We've gone through some bad winters, and that means a lot of snow shoveling. So when you look at someone my age, who's admittedly maybe got a tiny bit of gray hair, and you think of gray-haired guy, snow shoveling, what's the first thing you think of? Heart attack. Why is that? Yeah, and for instance, if I'm at a supermarket and I pick up a 50-pound box of kitty litter, no one runs up and says, put that down, you're going to have a heart attack. But if I touch a snow shovel, people run out of their house, put that shovel down, you're going to have a heart attack. So here is a poem that sort of feeds off that, I think, strange superstition. It's called Snow. A heavy snow, and men my age all over the city are having heart attacks in their driveways, dropping their nice new shovels with the ergonomic handles that finally did them no good. Gray-headed men who meant no harm, who abided by the rules and worked hard for modest rewards, are slipping softly from their mortgages, falling out of their marriages. How gracefully they swoon, that lovely old-fashioned word from grandkids, pension plans, winters in Florida. They should have known better than to shovel snow at their age. If only they'd heeded the sensible advice of their wives and hired a snow removal service. But there's more to life than merely being sensible. Sometimes a man must take up his shovel and head out alone into the snow. Thank you. It's a poem about courage, isn't it? Thank you very much. One of the best snow shoveling poems I know. So I was walking around the block in my little neighborhood about a year ago, and I saw something that it's just a remarkable thing. I was walking by a yard sale, and somebody was selling. I guess it was somebody old had probably died, and they were selling all their stuff at this estate sale or yard sale. On a card table was the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. And this really touched me deeply because I'm a lot older than most of you. After World War II, at the end of World War II, a lot of the soldiers came back and went to college on something called the GI Bill. And they bought nice little houses with nice little garages, and they raised families because of their GI Bill and their college education. And one of the things, my parents were of that generation, one of the things they wanted to do was give their kids something more than what they had. And one of those things they were officially supposed to give them was an encyclopedia. And if you were a kind of well-to-do family, you got the Cadillac, the Rolls-Royce of encyclopedias, which was the Encyclopedia Britannica. And if you were sort of a blue-collar family, as mine was, you got Collier's. It was a step down. But somebody would come to your door, a traveling salesman, and, he'd say, do you want your kids to be prepared for the future? And, well, of course I do. And you might spend a whole month's salary on this massive set of encyclopedias, which really no one in the family would ever use, but it was important that they were there. It meant something. It meant you cared about your kids and their future. The encyclopedia today has been replaced by your smartphone. But then it was sort of, welcome to the larger world. So I walk by and I see this entire set of Encyclopedia Britannica sitting out there, and I wrote this poem called Yard Sale. Someone is selling the Encyclopedia Britannica in all its volumes, which take up a whole card table. It looks brand new, even though it must be 60 years old. That's because it was only used a couple of times when the kids passed through 5th grade and had to do reports on the Zambezi River and Warren Harding. Der Führer was defunct. The boys came home, and everybody got the Encyclopedia Britannica, which sat on the bookshelf as they watched Gunsmoke through a haze of Winstons. Eventually, these people grew old and were sent to a home by the same children who once wrote reports on Warren Harding. And now the complete and unabridged Encyclopedia Britannica, bulging with important knowledge, is sitting on a card table in a light rain. And it was the rain that killed me, no one even bothered to cover it up because it's not worth anything now. One of the pleasures of teaching in a college, as I do in Cleveland, is that, you sort of get to, at least peripherally, observe what's happening in the world of much younger people, what they're doing, what they're thinking about, the music they're listening to, the technologies that are changing their lives. And I guess that, in a sense, is what this poem is about. One of the things that's different from your world and my college world is the strange phenomenon of the phone and the earbud, right? I mean, a lot of you guys go around with earbuds on, and there's kind of a constant musical soundtrack to your lives that was not a part of my life when I was 20 years old. And this poem kind of responds to that, and the fact that it's because of my students that I have a vague sense of what's going on in the musical culture. The poem is called Say My Name. It's about Beyonce. And it goes like this. Beyonce is singing. And what's strange about that is, first of all, I somehow know who Beyonce is. And second, the voice I'm hearing is coming from the earbuds of an iPod plugged into a kid sitting about 30 feet from me on the fourth floor of the library on a humid summer night, the buzz of cicadas outside sounding weirdly like the buzz coming from his head. And third, I know exactly what he's reading because I assigned it to him. It's the immortal Paradise Lost by John Milton, and it's very long and very hard, and it's a terrible thing to be reading late in the summer, time running short, life running out, the moon throbbing just above the trees, and somewhere out there, a woman is leaning against the fender of a car, waiting for you to shift her transmission into submission. And God knows I don't blame this kid for blowing out his ears at an early age as Adam and Eve stand there stunned in the garden, stupidly covering their crotches as if that would do any good, as if it would stop Beyonce, dark serpent, from reminding this nice Catholic boy in his brand new Tommy Hilfiger muscle shirt with his fresh round the biceps badass barbed wire tattoo that in this fallen world he's never, ever gonna get his smooth white hands on what they burn for. A nice poem about Beyonce. She and I were kind of an item a few years ago. Maybe you read about that. I found her boring. So here's a poem that kind of balances against the encyclopedia poem and also demonstrates my own hypocrisy, because as I'm making fun of the people on their phones and screens at the cafe, I do it too. And so here's a poem about one of the real problems with, I just mentioned the fallen world. This is a poem that kind of responds to that. The poem, it's another cafe poem, and it's called I Poem. And before I read the poem, how many of you have a MacBook of some kind? And you know when you open the lid on your MacBook, what lights up on the lid? An apple, and the apple has a bite taken out of it, right? Why? What does that mean? I know there are all kinds of urban myths about what the bite out of the apple means. I have my own ideas about it. I actually don't know what Steve Jobs might have said about it, but do you guys have any idea why there's a bite missing from that apple? What it indicates on the screen? Yeah.
Well, I don't know about the bite, but supposedly if you get one without the bite, then it's a magician's laptop.
Oh, can you find one without a bite? I've never seen one.
Well, you need to be a magician in an imaginary world to get it.
All right, in my next life. I think the bite is referring to the fall, you know, the eating of the tree of knowledge, and it's a kind of sly allusion to the fact that this laptop provides all knowledge, or maybe a kind of boastful allusion to that. But anyway, the poem, in a sense, takes its energy from that little slice, that little crescent that is missing from your apple's apple. Somebody's taken a bite from my laptop's glowing apple, the damaged fruit of our disobedience, of which we must constantly be reminded. There's the fatal crescent, the dark smile of Eve, who never dreamed of a laptop, who in fact didn't even have clothes or anything else for that matter, which was probably the nicest thing about the garden, I'm thinking, as I sit here in the cafe with my expensive computer, afraid to get up even for a minute in order to go to the bathroom, because someone might steal it. In this fallen world, she invented with a single bite of an apple nobody, and I mean nobody, was going to tell her not to eat. So think about it the next time you're looking at that apple. You know, I told you we had a really awful summer winter in Cleveland. But just the other day, I saw one of the first signs of spring, and I'm not talking about a crocus pushing its head out of the frost. I'm talking about hoses. Hoses appearing on the sides of houses. Doesn't that mean spring is here? As soon as you've seen that friendly green coil of a hose, you know you're going to survive. And this is a poem about hoses. And it's called, appropriately enough, Hoses. I love the hoses of summer, hanging in their green coils from the sides of houses, or slithering through lawns on their way to the cool meditations of sprinklers. I think of my father, armed with his Scotch and garden hose, probing the dusk with water, the world in flames around him, booze running the show. Still, he liked to walk out after dinner and water the yard, fiddling with the nozzle, misting this, showering that. Sometimes in the hot twilight, my sisters and I would run in our swimsuits through the grass while he followed us with a cold beam of water. And once, when my mother came out to watch, he turned the hose on her, the two of them laughing in a way we'd never heard, a laughter that must have brought them back to the beginning. Okay. I was on sabbatical last summer and part of the fall and spent that time in Europe, and it was an amazing time. And one of the cities, we were living in East Berlin, but one of the cities we visited was Rome. And this poem came out of our how many of you have been to Rome? Anybody here been to Rome? Yeah, it's a pretty amazing place, isn't it? But I have to tell you before reading the poem, we had been to many amazing European cities, and we'd seen lots and lots of castles, cathedrals, statues, great paintings. I mean, we'd seen hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of these things. And we had been in Rome for about 4 days, and we had spent each day going to cathedrals and temples and museums. And we got up one morning, and it was time to visit the Vatican. And this poem is about that experience. As you know, Rome is called the Eternal City. This poem is called Really Eternal City. After we'd walked for about an hour, heading toward the Vatican on a broiling August day, I began thinking about how long the tour we'd signed up for was going to be, and how many sacred things would be on view, and the immense amount of information the guide would tell us about all the paintings and relics and tombs and holy knuckle bones. I knew it would all kind of just melt together in my mind and congeal into one big lumpen mass of suffering and miracles and resurrections and crucifixions and gloomy old men in sandals. And as I was thinking this, we just happened to be passing through a shady little square where a couple of bare-bosomed nymphs were playing in the fountain, and there were no tour guides anywhere. There was no suffering or crucifixions. There were no complicated names or dates I would have to try to remember. And the cheap red wine at the sidewalk restaurant where we ended up spending the afternoon instead of going to the Vatican was wonderful, even miraculous, as was the spaghetti bolognese. And I want to tell you, budding poets, if you have written a poem and you're kind of struggling with the ending, that last line will work with any poem. Just, as was the spaghetti bolognese. Just try it. And no need to thank me. These are just the tips. Yeah, it's a. Okay. Many of you here. Let's see. Know about something called Rate My Professors? How many of you look at the Rate My Professors page periodically? Yeah. Well, you know, professors look at them too to see how they're rated. We can be very nervous about this. And I have a poem here about Rate My Professors. You know, you get rated in, I think, about 5 categories, like overall helplessness, helpless, yeah, overall, the Freudian slip. Overall helplessness. I scored high in that one. But nobody really cares about the first 4 categories. The only one you care about, if you're a professor, you go to the last one, which is what? Hotness. And either, now there's no like gradation, there's no level. Either you're hot or you're not. Either you get that little red chili pepper or there's nothing. So here's a poem called Rate My Professors. I haven't even gotten to helpfulness or overall quality. What am I looking at? I'm looking at hotness, and there is no chili pepper. Nothing. No matter how hard I stare, no red chili pepper appears under hotness. I sit quietly absorbing this. The hotness window is gray and cold as a winter day, as a snuffed candle. No zesty little chili is there to indicate that some, perhaps many, lovely young women were thinking about my dimples and my dark, brooding eyes, my hands both strong and gentle as I turned the pages of Song of Myself. Instead, they were actually thinking about Song of Myself, which I realize is the whole point, but I checked the ratings for my colleagues in the department. Jim, the nerdy rhetorician, he has a pepper. Ditto John, the Miltonist, with his bad breath and absurd gray ponytail. Even Larry, the Victorianist, with his elbow patches and infuriating way of starting every other sentence with, "When I was at Yale." Larry is hot. The last time I checked my hotness was 5 years ago. I was hot. And now the conclusion is, the inescapable conclusion has to be, I turn off the computer. I pick up a stack of student essays and begin grading them with a remarkably high number of even A and A+ grades. In the margins, I write many, many flattering comments. So help me out, would you? Just go to my Rate Your Professors page today. Give me that chili. Is that too much to ask? It's so easy for you. As you may have noticed, I seem to be graying a little bit. And, you know, one of the great themes of poetry is, and you just heard it in Rate My Professor, the fact of aging, of moving out of glorious youth. And I find myself writing about that more and more. So a few summers ago, I was out in California visiting my sister who lives there in Santa Cruz, and she said, "You know, George, you're getting kind of gray, and maybe it's time you started thinking about dyeing your hair." And I said, no, that's ridiculous. You know, coloring your hair, once you go down that road, you know, there's no coming back, and it's so sort of insincere. But she kept nagging at me, so finally I agreed, and we went down to the supermarket and we got the stuff, and I put it on. I spent the whole summer feeling sort of like a fraud. However, I did get this poem out of it. The two things I have to tell you. First of all, I'm not always that good at poem titles, but this has got the best title of any poem written in America in the last 10 years. And the title is Grecian Temples. Yeah, all right, well. Secondly, the second line of this poem, it's really a terrible line of poetry. It's awful. And I know that. You don't have to come up to me after the reading and say that line was awful. What you have to understand is it's not my line. I'm quoting my sister, who's a business person, and this is how they talk. Okay? So don't blame me for this. Grecian temples. Because I'm getting pretty gray at the temples, which negatively impacts my earning potential, and does not necessarily attract vibrant young women with their perfumed hair to dally with me on the green hillside, I go out and buy some Grecian hair formula. And after the whole process, which involves rubber gloves, a tiny chemistry set, and perfect timing, I look great. I look very fresh and virile, full of earning potential. But when I take my 15-year-old beagle out for his evening walk, the contrast is unfortunate. Next to me, he doesn't look all that great, with his graying snout, his sort of faded, worn-out dog look. It makes me feel old walking around with a dog like that. It's not something a potential employer, much less a vibrant young woman with perfumed hair, would necessarily go for. So I go out and get some more Grecian hair formula, light brown, my beagle's original color. And after all the rigmarole, he looks terrific. I mean, he's not going to win any friskiness contests, not at 15, but there's a definite visual improvement. The two of us walk virilely around the block. The next day, a striking young woman at the bookstore happens to ask me about my parents, who are in fact long dead due to the effects of age. They were very old, which causes death. But having dead old parents does not go with my virile, intensely fresh new look. So I say to the woman, my parents are fine. They love their active lifestyle in San Diego. You know, windsurfing, high lie, a still vibrant sex life. And while this does not necessarily cause her to come dally with me on the green hillside, I can tell it doesn't exactly hurt my chances. I can see her imagining dinner with my sparkly, young-seeming mom and dad at some beachside restaurant where we would announce our engagement. Your son has great earning potential, she'd say to Dad, who would take a gander at her and give me a wink, just like he used to, back when he was alive and vibrant. Thank you. Just going to read 2 or 3 more poems. Let me ask you, just curious, how many of you here have won a MacArthur Genius Grant? Is it just, am I the only one? It's kind of a lonely feeling. Oh, well. All right, that's all. No, actually, I have not won a MacArthur Genius Grant, but it is something I would really like to win for 2 reasons. First, as you may know, they pay about $500,000, but I don't need the money, I teach. So, but better than the mere $500,000 is that you are officially designated a genius. So I'm imagining this at home with my wife, like, weren't you supposed to change the kitty litter box? Genius. Did you forget to take out the trash today? Genius. It would have just been, she would have had such fun with it. So I've never won one, but I kind of almost thought, well, I came close. This poem was called Genius. It was nice being a genius worth nearly $500,000 for the 2 or 3 minutes it took me to walk back to my house from the mailbox, the letter from the foundation trembling in my hand. Frankly, for the first minute, I was somewhat surprised at being a genius. I'd only published a couple of things at that point. I didn't even have a book. I was just a part-time lecturer at a small Midwestern college. But early into the second minute, I had fully embraced the fact of my genius. I mean, these guys know what they're doing, right? Who am I to tell the foundation its business? And I was already rehearsing the modest, hey, it's no big deal tone of voice I'd be using on the phone for the rest of the day as I called all my friends, and especially my enemies, to share the good news. But when I opened the letter and found it was merely a request for me to recommend someone else to be a genius, I lost interest and made myself a ham sandwich. And that's another line that it works perfectly at the end of any poem. Like, take Paradise Lost. Just put, I made myself a ham sandwich at the very end of that poem, and it's a much better poem. Just try it when you get home, the privacy of your own home. All right. I am going to read, because I want there to be some time. I think you guys are going to start leaving at 10 till, right? I want there to be some time for maybe a little Q&A. I'm going to read two more poems, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. This is a poem about everybody has had a horrible job, right? Probably the worst job I ever had was being a busboy. And is anyone here at bust tables? You're at the bottom of the whole structure of the food industry, right? You're just a little worker drone. And God, it was a brutal job. So here's a poem called Busboy. Oh, teenage busboy of the summer dusk, lugging your gray tub of swill, bathed in slop and ooze and bits of spaghetti in the alley behind the Applebee's, hate me if you will, as I pass by in my tennis shorts and Obama t-shirt with a vibrant dark-haired woman on my way to watch Game 3 of the NBA Finals at our local microbrewery. Hate me, but you cannot know that I once labored as you do now at a big boy in Riverside, California, elbow deep in the very same lumpish goop and ooze. Like you, I was of the slime of alleys, of the same immemorial cigarette butts and rotting cottage cheese. And like you, I dreamed of a certain waitress and of driving a fork into the forehead of the night manager and of spitting in the soup of plump, complacent, well-dressed diners who snapped their fingers at me. But most of all, I dreamed of being clean and cool and never, ever again slogging through the world's filth and stink, which is something I have achieved, as must be perfectly obvious to you. All right, the last poem I'm going to read, and thank you for being such a really great audience. The most important person to me in my life in many ways, and certainly in my life as a writer, was my dear aunt, my father's sister, my Aunt Betty, who all through my struggles to get somewhere in this poetry business stood behind me, stood beside me, and encouraged me to just keep going. I think everybody has to have somebody like that in their life. So this poem is from my Aunt Betty. It's called The White Museum. My aunt was an organ donor, and so the day she died, her organs were harvested for medical science. I suppose there must be people who list under occupation organ harvester, people for whom it is always harvest season, each death bringing its bounty. They spend their days loading wagon loads of kidneys, cornucopias of corneas, burlap sacks groaning with hearts and lungs and the pale green sprouts of gallbladders, and even from time to time the weighty cauliflower of a brain. And perhaps today, as I sit in this cafe watching the snow and thinking about my aunt, a young medical student somewhere is moving through the white museum of her brain, making his way slowly from one great room to the next. Here is the gallery of her childhood, with that great canvas depicting her father holding her on his lap in the backyard of their bungalow in St. Louis. And here is a sketch of her the summer after her mother died, walking down a street in Berlin when the broken city was itself a museum. And here is a small, vivid oil painting of the two of us sitting in a cafe in London, arguing over the work of Constable or Turner or Francis Bacon after a visit to the Tate. I want you to know, as you sit there with your microscope and your slides, there's no need to be reverent before these images. That's the last thing she would have wanted. But do be respectful. Speak quietly. No flash photography. Tell your friends you saw something beautiful. And thank you very much. Say, and if, very kind of you, and if any of you has a question about me and my so-called work, no question will be turned away. No question will be answered. One question. Wow, I've made you speechless. Oh yes, there's a yes.
So your work represents a certain irreverence for
Yeah.
has that always been kind of your voice when writing poetry?
No, I don't. The question was, my work has a kind of irreverence about it. Has that always been my poetic voice? I think I really, I know it's kind of a cliche to talk about discovering your voice, but nonetheless, I think it's true. You do, and you spend your early years as a writer imitating and copying much better writers until you find something that somehow seems true to who you are. And for me, that happened. That didn't happen until I was in my late 40s. And I went through a divorce, and I spent a summer trying to write about that experience in a way that didn't seem maudlin and sentimental, and that somehow seemed truer to me. All my poems tended to be very gloomy and serious and sort of high rhetoric, and I thought, that's not really the guy I am, though. I mean, someone once said, I remember we would go around when I was an undergrad saying this, the world is a tragedy to those who feel, a comedy to those who think. And I thought, all of us feel and think. And the world is a very serious place, and it's a very funny place. And so I started working to get both of those things into my poems. And so it's only been in like the last, 15 years or so that I really feel like I've been writing the way I've always wanted to write. So, yeah. Well, poetry is my main thing. I write magazine articles, journal articles, and essays, and I've done various journalistic radio pieces for NPR, and I really like doing that. But I don't think I have any particular talent for that. It's just something I enjoy doing, and it's a nice shift from poetry. I just don't think I have anything to say as a fiction writer. I've certainly taken a shot at it a time or two. It just doesn't. It's like putting on a jacket that doesn't fit. So I'm going to stick with poetry for now. Yeah.
How did you meet Garrison Keillor then?
Garrison Keillor, he's done some amazing things for American poetry. One of them is this daily radio show on National Public Radio called The Writer's Almanac. And back in 2006, this Utah State University Press published this book called Haywire, and they sent it to the Writer's Almanac. And Keillor liked the book, and he started reading from it. And I'll give you a sense of the power of Garrison Keillor. The first week this book came out, he read 4 of the poems in 1 week on the Writer's Almanac. The book, I think, had an initial press run of something like 1,200, and the book sold out right away. So the book came out and sold out in a week, and then a month later he did the same thing and another press run sold out right away. In the world of poetry, that doesn't happen. I mean, it doesn't occur. But this is a show that's heard all over the nation. And if you've never heard the Writer's Almanac, just Google it. Type in the Writer's Almanac. You can sign up for free, and you get it, online, or you can listen to it on the radio if your town happens to get it. But online, you can hear Garrison Keillor. He picks some poem, usually by a living, breathing American poet, every day, and he does a wonderful reading of the poem and offers it to the entire nation. And it's incredible. So he did a bunch of my poems on that, and then he was in Cleveland one time doing a live show and asked if we could get together, and I said, I'm really busy that night, but I'll see what I can do. And so I gave him like 5 minutes. He was very nervous. No, he did a show, and then we went to dinner together. It was like one of the most exciting nights in my life, and then he asked me if I'd like to be on Prairie Home Companion. And so, I mean, Garrison Keillor and Billy Collins are two of many people we all of us writers, especially poets, are so indebted to. So that's what happened with the Keillor connection. Yeah, another question. Hi. You mean it's kind of like, how do I get ideas for poems? Oh, I don't. That's the answer. I mean, I don't have a list of prompts or ideas. I have a few really pragmatic suggestions for writers, poets in this class, and one of the main ones is I don't use my electronic organizer at all. I don't have one really, but I do carry around one of those tiny little spiral notebooks that are like 2 inches by 3 inches with a little pencil stuck into the spring. I carry it in my back pocket. And as I go through the day, if I get an idea for a poem, I'll just mark it down in a kind of shorthand. Then when I get up in the morning to write, I have something to write about. But that's about as organized as it gets. And then, I mean, I don't know, maybe there are people who have whole indexes of complicated things, but you can't sit down and make yourself have an idea, but ideas will come to you. I've compared it before to, you have a dog that goes running through a field all day. It comes back with some burrs on it. You spend the day walking around in the world, and you come back with a couple of burrs that stuck to you, some things you want to write about. So that's what I do, and it makes all the difference. You sit down in the morning and you have nothing to say. It's kind of a lonely feeling. But if you pull out your little notebook, and there are 3 things that somehow occurred to you as being interesting, strange, mysterious, funny. So that's what I do. That's my secret. You're free to borrow it. Yeah.
Sorry, I have another question. What's your editing process like? Do you just get a piece into submission, or do you let something go?
I when I'm writing, like during the summer or during open periods, I write every day, 5 days a week. I write in the morning for about 2 hours, and at the end of the week, I usually have 6 or 8 drafts of a poem, and I type them into the computer over the weekend. And then at least I know which ones are going to work and which ones aren't. And in a whole week, there might be one poem I think is worth holding on to. I mean, even that is pretty good. And then that's the one I'll kind of keep. I never try to resuscitate poems that arrive dead on arrival, I mean, I know people who keep going back to poems, and maybe you've been at readings where a poet will say, I've been working on this poem for 8 years. And I don't ever believe that for 1 minute. I don't believe it. If the poem isn't working like right away, I'm just going to scrap it. So I'm very merciless about it. But you can tell. There's a poem that kind of sits up and says, something exciting is happening here. I will work on that poem. I will revise it, and then I'll leave it alone for a couple of weeks. Then I'll come back to it. And that process might go on for maybe a couple of months. And then I kind of feel like the poem is ready to be sent out to a journal or something. I think you can beat a poem to death. You can revise it into, like turning your blender on puree. You've gone over it so many times that it's lost its freshness. But a couple of months of get a little distance on it, and it occasionally happens. You have a poem that is just almost ready to go immediately, but that's really rare. So, yeah, the back.
Do poems tend to ask you to give them a unique form, or do you feel like you can be, to a degree, formulaic and approach things?
Well, if you mean form as in, like, is it free verse or is it a sonnet or something?
Yeah, or just like the way you structure the flow of
I never approach it with a sense of structure. I mean, I think most writers find that the poem, you sort of follow the poem on its own journey, right? You start writing, and something occurs to you. I mean, I'll have students come in and say, I've got this great idea. My father did such and such and such and such, and then he did this. And they tell me the whole poem. And I'll say, you've already killed it. You can't even write that poem now. I want to start with just a feeling, an image, and just kind of carry it. Just kind of follow it along and see where it arrives. Usually it doesn't go anywhere. But then you see, if it works, then my next job is try to take as much away from it as I can. I really like the idea of a poem being as lean and spare as possible. Very few of my poems are over a page long. And so, yeah, I mean, I really admire formalist poets, but I'm not one of them. And so, yeah, maybe one more question? Yeah.
When you're writing, are you writing for yourself or for an audience? And if you're writing for an audience, like how do you sort of picture it?
Well, I have a really easy answer for you, but it may not work for this group because I'm not sure if you do this. Who is the audience I think of when I'm writing? People who listen to NPR. And that is the best answer I can give you. It's really true. If you're the kind of person who turns on NPR on your drive home, you're the kind of person who's going to like my poems. And it's a perfect correspondence. Before I listened to NPR, I don't know what I was thinking about. I guess I was thinking about poems that would please my teachers that I had when I was in school. But now, it's kind of a demographic, college-educated, middle-class thing. So do you guys listen to NPR? The students? I mean, I think you should, but I can see why it may not work for you. I don't know. But that's it. If you want to know who my audience is, listen to NPR, and you'll hear from them. Thanks very much, you guys. Thanks again. It was a wonderful time. Thank you.